Since the beginning of its genocide in Gaza, Israel has attacked Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Tunisia, and now Qatar. On Tuesday, the Netanyahu government carried out an unprecedented strike in Doha that has shocked the region and the world. So what's left of international law and a rule-based order? Is there any hope for diplomacy when negotiators are assassinated? And can the U.S. rein in Netanyahu and Israel? An upfront special. Joining me to discuss Israel's attack on Qatar are Daniel Levy, former official negotiator for the Israeli government, Phyllis Bennis, fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies, and Hannah Ashekh, the Palestine Project Coordinator at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you all for joining me. Hannah, I'm actually going to start with you. On Tuesday, Israel launched an unprecedented airstrike on Qatar's capital of Doha. The Qatari Prime Minister has described Israel's attack as state terrorism. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, let's look at the facts. Israel bombed negotiators in the capital of the mediator. When Israeli officials, the Israeli negotiating team, which is led by the Mossad, travel to Doha, they travel there under the assumption and under the understanding that they will have protection in that place to negotiate a deal. The negotiators were gathered to review a ceasefire proposal that was introduced by the United States. When Israel bombs the capital city of a mediator, where a negotiating team was looking to assess what would have been, according to the Qatari foreign minister and prime minister as well, very significant concessions to bring this war to an end. They were struck to disrupt this. So when Israel strikes, they are not just trying to kill mediators. They are trying to assassinate the concept of diplomacy itself, to assassinate the concept of mediation, and to assassinate the concept of conflict de-escalation. This is quite concerning. And I think there's good reason to accept this assessment.
Daniel, the Israeli government would obviously take a different position. They've been very clear in saying that this was a necessary mission that was designed to address key leaders of Hamas. They used the word terrorist multiple times in their statements. They effectively said that this was a necessary military strategy, not an attempt to undermine diplomacy. How do you respond to that?
If you believe that, then I have this fantastic piece of property on Mars to sell you, Mark. I mean, let's peel away the layers of BS, because this didn't start on Tuesday with that strike. Israel has made very clear what its intentions are. And the idea that this is a war against Hamas, or that you remove this Hamas leader or another Hamas leader, and that is going to change the negotiating dynamic, that is going to be the way this ends, that has no credibility whatsoever. Partly it has no credibility because of just how much Israel is engaged in that in the last 23 months. So I don't, though, even think that the Israeli narrative of, you know, this is the way that you defeat Hamas, that you end the war, I don't think that explains why you would do this in Qatar. I don't think Israel needed to carry out such a covert, in-your-face operation in order to upend the talks. They've successfully upended the talks without conducting a strike on Qatari sovereign territory until now, and they didn't need to do it now. So I think you have to look for the explanation here somewhere else, which is where this fits into the Israeli project of trying to assert regional hegemony and subservience by saying, we can strike anyone, anywhere, you have no military answer to us, therefore bend the knee. And that's what I think was going on.
But why in Qatar? I mean, you're talking about the mediator. You're talking about a nation that has been instrumental in peace talks. It would seem to me that they could be shooting themselves in the foot, pardon the expression.
Well, but to say that, you have to begin with the premise that Israel has some interest in a successful outcome to this mediation. And that's just a mistaken premise from the get-go. Yes, this is particularly egregious, as was just outlined. Israeli negotiators, the Mossad chief, ministers, have gone back and forward under the auspices of Qatar, because Qatar is not freelancing here. Qatar is the mediator acknowledged by both parties, by the other mediating parties, by the US. So you've really got to be going out on a limb and trying to assert something to do this in Qatar. And I think the answer is they did this because they could. And they wanted to send the signal that it does not matter if you have a large American base in your country. The Americans won't be there for you, and you are therefore going to have to accept our dominance. Do you have an answer to that? And actually, as an analyst, the question I would ask is, the countries that are going to convene in Doha shortly, the countries in the region who have expressed support, do you have more than that? Can you put on the table a credible deterrence containment position of an alliance that can actually stop Israel from doing this? Because if you can't, then this continues, whether it's in Doha or elsewhere. Israel has, of course, struck several other regional states, whether that's Syria, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, of course, the destruction in Palestine, the ethnic cleansing and genocide there. And we saw in Tunis at the same time as this attack on Qatar, on the global Sumud flotilla, the Gaza Aid flotilla.
Israel's ambassador to the United States has now warned that if Hamas leaders survived, they'll be hit again. He stated, "We have put terrorists on notice. Wherever they may be, we're going to pursue them, and we're going to destroy those who will destroy us." That's pretty ominous. Should we expect to see another strike soon?
Well, I think we've been seeing strikes all along. What Daniel said is very important. Israel, just in this last year and a half, year and 3/4 that we've seen since the beginning of the genocide in Gaza, has attacked 7 countries in the region. That's not nothing. That's about asserting this kind of dominance. The reason this was such an important escalation, which both of my colleagues have spoken to, is precisely because of that giant base that exists in Qatar. Qatar is a tiny country, right? It's the size of Connecticut. You can drive through it in a couple of hours. And in the middle of this tiny country is this enormous US military base, the biggest one in the region. It's an air base. And it controls, well, maybe it doesn't control completely, but it has complete access to the airspace. They know exactly what's going on there and could have stopped the missiles from going in. There's no question that the US knew about this, green-lighted it, officially or unofficially. Because
as of now, we have no confirmation of that. There is no confirmation that we're still investigating.
Either, but absolutely. I believe it to be true because it's so consistent. The arrogance, the disdain of the Israeli leadership, most importantly, Benjamin Netanyahu, but others as well, have been very clear that they count on the U.S. supporting them regardless of what they do, regardless of what the president says, whether it's President Biden saying he's heartbroken at a strike, the most recent Israeli strike that's killing numbers of Palestinian civilians, or whether it's President Trump saying that he didn't like the fact that it happened in Qatar.
He said in his normal articulate way, "I was not thrilled."
He was not thrilled. I'm sure he was not thrilled, but
there's an interesting point there I want you to think about, right? Because Qatar is considered a major U.S. ally. They have a major military base, as you pointed out. There's about 10,000 U.S. military personnel there. They welcomed President Trump there in May. There does seem to be something to the argument that the U.S. really didn't want this to happen.
I think the U.S. might have preferred that it not happen exactly at the moment when there was this illusion of negotiations, which we have seen so many times before. Israel has agreed. Now, will Hamas agree? Well, Hamas might not agree. We know that there was a 100-word presentation from our president with our tax money to Hamas saying, if you do this, the text of it is quite astonishing. All hostages would be released. The numbers of Palestinian prisoners were said to be consistent with the past, and a 60-day ceasefire. All they would get in return is the promise of some negotiations, and that there would be a guarantee of a ceasefire as long as the negotiations go forward.
Yeah.
That gives Israel a veto. As soon as they walk away from the negotiations, there's no ceasefire. As Daniel was saying, this is a moment when Israel is asserting its role as a regional hegemonic power. It's the junior partner of the U.S. in the region, and it wants to be sure that all the other countries understand it. We saw in the beginning of the second Trump administration a bit of a shift in his first trip. When he didn't go to Israel on his first trip, he visited all the Arab states, especially the Gulfies. They wanted that. They wanted that statement from the U.S. that in the context of the so-called Abraham Accords, that this is a new era for the Middle East, right? And that in this era, the Arab states are going to be much more important Arab allies.
If this is all true, if the U.S. was indeed blindsided by the attack, even if they have a long-term interest in that happening, if this is to upset negotiations, if this is unsettling to peace in the region, is it safe to say, Hannah, that Netanyahu and Israel have just gone rogue?
Well, I think we have to look at how this is built up over time. And I think it has just as much to do with Israel possibly going rogue in this question as it has to do with the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Israel is emboldened to attack something like 7 countries in 72 hours. It hit its furthest east point, meaning Qatar, and its furthest west point, meaning off the coast of Tunisia, within this small period of time, and it kills dozens of Palestinians in Gaza per day. It's emboldened to do these things right now because of an acceleration and accumulation over time. In the past, from time to time, the United States would look at the behavior of Israel and say, okay, this provocation is not in the interests of the U.S. in the region. Let's scale it back. They did this in 1956 in the tripartite aggression against Egypt. They did this in 1982 when Palestinians, the PLO, this predates Hamas, negotiated with the United States to disarm in Lebanon and to leave the country. PLO fighters leave, and Palestinians are brutally massacred in Sabra and Shatila during that time. But what happened over time, it predates Netanyahu, and it has more to do with just his personality, and it predates Hamas, like I had mentioned, is that the U.S. has taken more and more and more of a hands-off approach when it comes to constraining Israel, and if anything, like Phyllis mentioned, Israel is very much regarded as the junior partner of the United States in the Middle East, especially.
But it's feeling like the tail is walking the dog now. I mean, you mentioned the Suez crisis, you mentioned Lebanon. I mean, there are these moments where the U.S. has pushed back, and the pushback has been effective. It seems now that Netanyahu is not particularly responsive. He seems to be thumbing his nose not just at the international community, but many would argue the United States itself. Is Netanyahu completely unwilling to engage anybody? Is he completely uninterested in playing fair or playing ball with the United States even? It's staunchest ally.
Yes, because the message that he was given time and time again, and that his predecessors were given, like Uhud Olmert, whether it was 2008 when he cynically used a truce so that he could prepare the ground for his massive assault on Gaza in the winter of 2008, or whether it was 2014 when Palestinians announced a national unity government. So he launched, Netanyahu then launched a savage attack on Gaza that killed over 1,000 people in 51 days. In all of these times, the lesson that Israel was told is that you can defy international norms, you can exceed new boundaries every single time, and then the next time you exceed a boundary, you can continue to count on U.S. bombs to keep flowing in, for the military finance to keep flowing in. And if anything, we'll increase it for you with more emergency funding.
Then how do you make sense of all this? There is a clear contravention of international law, a violation of international norms, informal and formal peace treaties and agreements, under the table, over the table talks. All of it's been violated at this point. How do you make sense of it given Israel's geopolitical positioning right now?
Well, I think this is what's perhaps interesting and a little bit intriguing and poses some new questions, because Israel acting like a rogue state and America being the rogue enabler of that is, as Hannah and Phyllis have explained to us, hardly breaking news. That's the old story. And it went from a level of Israel being able to serially violate international law to a level under the Biden administration where Israel could engage in commissioning a genocide against the Palestinians. And that was, of course, picked up by Trump. What I think is new today is that Israel is turning around and saying, under Trump, can we actually convince this guy to put ourselves in a position where Netanyahu, I think, has gone to the American president and said, you know why people love and respect you, Mr. President? Because you're tough, because you're strong, because you're the meanest guy in the room. And that's us in the region. And yes, your allies are angry today. But what about next week and a few weeks from now? When they see they've got no other option, they're not going to leave you, Mr. President, and you're not going to leave us. So this is the play under the Trump administration to engage in a new version of that rogue actor with the support of the US. And it is precisely this hegemonic project which says we can finish the job of annihilating and removing the Palestinians, and we can have the rest of the region accept our dominance and our leadership. And Netanyahu's gamble is that when I dare you to do anything about it, you don't have a response, either in terms of using your leverage with the US or in terms of coming together and creating your own alliance, or in terms of accelerating your hedge and looking elsewhere. Because the geopolitics of the world we live in are shifting. You don't need to exclusively rely on the US. In fact, you don't need to rely on the US. The pictures just a few days before this happened out of Tianjin in China of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting of Xi, Putin, and Modi tell a story. It's a story that one asks, is the West Asia region, is the Gulf, is the Middle East paying attention to the Israeli gamble? The American gamble is they will come running back to us. I would argue there is no Pax Americana to go running back to because America has vacated the field of geostrategy. This is just run as a mafia corporation. And if people wake up to that, then the Israeli strike will be very consequential.
Is that an extension of just U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East over the last 10 to 20 years? Or is that unique to Trump and his particular investment in the Abraham Accords? Is this a Trump thing or is this just a U.S. thing?
There is continuity and there is change. I would argue that there are elements of this that are qualitatively different. The Saudis saw in 2019 at Abqaiq when their oil field was attacked, Trump didn't come forward. The Qataris are seeing that this is different because this is America's ally. This is, as I think it seems clear, this couldn't have been done without America knowing about it. And that's one of the things Israel is relying on, by the way. Israel wants this rumor mill to go around that says, well, if the Americans knew, come on, the Qataris knew. Israel is trying, I would argue, to make every leadership in the region look weak, look emaciated in the eyes of its own people, so that it is even more reliant on America and by extension on Israel. And that's a real challenge and question that people are going to have to answer. As to the criminality of the act, if I may, let me just add the following. If what Netanyahu has told us, that it's legitimate if you're harboring a terrorist, that we can go after you anywhere, of course, that's a violation of international law. And if that's the case, then there is a gentleman who is the prime minister of a country that has an ICC arrest warrant against his name for war crimes. His name is Mr. Netanyahu.
Hannah, what does this mean for Palestinians? I want to bring the focus back for a moment to the people who are suffering right now, the people who are under the thumb of a genocide. What does it mean for there to be this kind of regional reorganization? What does it mean for peace talks to be disrupted again? Are we going to see a prolonged genocide? Does this lengthen the suffering? What does it mean?
It means that they're going to be crushed now not only under the bombs, but under the total collapse of the international community. That's what Palestinians are dealing with. And it looks like Gaza is headed towards total annihilation as an ancient city, Gaza City, is being destroyed, as the remaining high-rise towers are being crowded, as Israel is bombing makeshift tents that refugees are living in, as 6 Palestinians on September 10th starved to death. As all of this has happened, the West Bank is now looking. There are already tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians in the northern West Bank as Israel is announcing annexation. By the way, after the United Arab Emirates, who is in the Abraham Accords, told Israel that they will reconsider their participation in this agreement if they are to annex the West Bank. And how does Israel thank them? They announce plans for annexation. And so there are serious threats on Palestinians in the West Bank. There are actually serious threats against Palestinian citizens of Israel as well in the future. If Israel succeeds in its mission to ethnically cleanse Gaza, or to ethnically cleanse most of Gaza and to reoccupy it, they can then expand to what they always saw as the more valuable territory, which is the West Bank, and take more and more of it to push out more and more Palestinians. Jordan's peace deal with Israel is totally irrelevant in this formula as well. They will push Palestinians, more Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan. And so Palestinians are waiting with bated breath to find some sort of intervention from the international community.
Daniel.
What Israel has done has, I think, put these possibilities more on the table than ever. Because the gamble, that I've called it, lies in the fact that this looks like it could well be hubristic overreach on the part of an Israeli leadership that may be misreading the global map and the opinion map and how people are looking at the crimes Israel has committed, how radicalizing and destabilizing an impact that has on the region. That governments, whether in the region or elsewhere, who probably don't want to take steps, but Israel is forcing them to come to terms with the reality that Iran isn't the biggest threat in the region. I think there are conversations on the cusp of taking place or taking place already in terms of how does one begin to contain this. And there is, and this is important, again, it doesn't translate into policy quick enough, but there is a change in how brand Israel is perceived, how people, publics are willing to mobilize. Inside Europe, you've seen a series of countries, also elsewhere, Western allies of Israel recognizing Palestine. I would say that is a hollow gesture, but I would say that gesture came from a place where they felt they had to do something because their publics are disgusted by what they see in terms of the crimes being committed against the Palestinians. I think the signal to those people everywhere in the world is not that this is futile and hopeless, but that the sands are shifting and we can push this over the edge, because that will be what gets Israel to a place where it has to reconsider its actions. There is a debate inside Israel, but it is not the kind of debate that has yet created an incentive structure where a different set of choices are going to be made. And that can be changed.
Can I just say one thing about the change in the United States that I think all the political leadership, but particularly the leadership of the Democratic Party, ignores at their peril? That is that 77% of Democrats say no more aid to Israel. That's huge. When there was a poll several months ago to find out, really to look at why did people not vote for Kamala Harris in the last election, the expectation was that the main reason would be the economy, that the economy was in terrible shape. Turned out that wasn't the main reason. The main reason was Gaza. People were given 6 options, and these were a very specific voter bloc. These were people who voted for Biden in 2020 and did not vote for his successor, Kamala Harris, in 2024. It included people who voted for Trump the next time, who didn't vote at all the next time, who voted for members of Congress but didn't vote for president, or who voted for a third party. It included all of those. And they were asked, what's the single most important reason? We know you have many reasons. What's the single most important reason you did not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024? The answer was Gaza, 29%. We've never seen numbers like this. The Democrats show no sign of it. The gap between the elected leadership of that party and its political base is massive and widening.
Hannah, I'll give you the last word on this. In light of those shifting tides, the reorganization of the Middle East, and the immense suffering on the ground, how likely are we to see any reining in of Netanyahu, any reining in of Israel in the foreseeable future?
But before I get to that, I would like to just add one note on this issue of what's changing in the big picture, which we've been discussing throughout our time here, but also specifically what's changing within the United States itself is that for decades now, U.S. politics and the U.S. general public has become more and more polarized than ever. They move further and further away from each other on every single issue. But in recent years, and actually still during the current Trump term, actually, if there's one issue that the parties are starting to slowly inch towards each other more on, it's the question of arms to Israel. It's the question of Palestine, is the one thing that's sort of changing here. And so the big question is, will this start to cost the MAGA movement? Will it start to cost Donald Trump? Will it start to cost who is in power at this moment? This is one thing that over time could possibly lead to some sort of change. Now, if we're to take a step back to get to your question about what could possibly rein Netanyahu in, I think there's one pattern that hasn't changed over a long time, and that is the United States. If there is some sort of unified military action, whether that means we're bringing in UN peacekeepers, I should say, or we're bringing in some sort of coordinated Arab military response, which seems highly, highly, highly unlikely. At any rate, the United States still does have the final word. No matter how much we might be headed towards a multipolar world, no matter how much there might be big changes within the region, this is still who has the final word and will in this situation as well.
Right. I want to thank you all for joining me. Daniel Levy, Phyllis Bennis, Hannah Ashech, thank you so much. Everybody, that is our show. Up Front, we'll be back next week.